Hello everyone, it's Nina. So today's video I'm going to talk about gate 64 or gene key 64. If you are not familiar with this specific gate, it is in the head center and it is called the gate of confusion for a very good reason. It is all about making sense of the past, and there can be a theme of like creating these stories and reflecting on things that maybe necessarily aren't true, which is actually really, this is a very silly gate to really go into and dive into. And I've actually been sitting in deep contemplation with this for the past year, because this is actually a gate that is very prominent in my human design and also in my gene keys profile. So gate 64 is my unconscious earth. So it's something that I may not necessarily be aware of, but other people probably see within me a lot. And it's also at the very base of my gene key profile. It is my purpose. And so when I dove into the Venus sequence last year, this was the first sphere that I explored in that sequence. And I went through the Venus sequence maybe like over the span of 3 or 4 months and kind of went back and reflected on it here and there over the past year. And then about a month or two ago, I decided to start the Venus sequence again and go through it, not necessarily more intentionally, it's just in a different way from a different perspective, and to actually go more slowly without really having any expectations of what would come out of it. Whereas before I was not really working and I had time to sit and contemplate and journal and like really go deep into it all at once and go head first into it. And now that I'm going through it again, the gene key 64 is the first one that I'm going through, and it has been uncovering more and more layers for me to look at within myself and the purpose of my relationships and just in general. And it's been hilarious in a lot of ways, but also devastating in other ways, and very, very beautiful. And the journey to really understanding what it means to be in a place of confusion and how it actually goes hand in hand with its programming partner, gate 63. So if you have that gate within your gene key or your human design profile, this is something that you might notice kind of reflections or similarities in as well. And so in this video, I'm going to go through my reflections on this and what I have sat in contemplation with and how I've integrated it and how I've kind of viewed it and the lessons that I've learned from it. So to start off, this is my unconscious earth. And, when I really got into human design and I started looking up gate 64, I was like, oh, the gate of confusion. And so it made sense that like, oh yeah, I'm in a confused state, like mentally. So this can become a very mental process of being like, what, like, why did this happen? How does this need to happen? And trying to fix everything and find patterns and things. And so it's like looking for this like logical pattern. And the joke of this key or this gate is that there is none. There's no logic to how problems get solved. And I laugh because it's opposite of other head gates, because this is part of the collective circuitry. So it's all about reflecting back on the past and sharing with the collective. And it can be a very incredible storytelling gate or channel, the 6447. And it's fun to listen to people who have this gate, because they tend to really reflect on the past and make sense of it and then share their stories. And Raw talks about how people with this gate, like they reflect back on the past, but it's not necessarily the truth. And so when they're sharing, it's not like a whole truth, and it's a little bit of a distorted past. But in doing that, it's actually really helpful for other people to listen and to hear that in like a wild and crazy way, which when you really think about it from a bigger perspective, it's like everyone's walking around in their own illusion, in their own world, and who even knows what the real truth is. And that's a lot of what Richard Rudd talks about with his gene key, is that there can be a lot of illusion because of our mental states. And so from a gene key perspective, there's the shadow, the gift and the siddhi. And the shadow is the confusion for gate 64, and the gift is imagination, and the siddhi is illumination. And so just starting with the shadow, this is something that I realized that I have been so caught up in for most of my life, like up until recently. And it was very shocking to really understand this on like a deeper, more cellular level. And I actually was deeply contemplating this gene key before I went into a 3-day silent Vipassana. And it gave me some context to become more aware and like be able to like really observe thoughts and things that were coming up for me. And the shadow aspect of this gate is that, you know, you're gonna try to make sense of so many different things, and the biggest thing with this gate is that you just need time. And our mind is going to try to find patterns and try to make sense of things right off the bat. And when it cannot, it will go in these crazy loops, and it will literally drive you just mad. And I've honestly been in that state for the past year or so, trying to make sense of things that I didn't have all of the puzzle pieces for. And it was just set on a loop in my mind, just living rent-free, creating a lot of emotions and stress on me and my mental state and my nervous system. And so I know firsthand how this affects somebody mentally and physically and emotionally. And we are in charge of how that really turns out. And so when we have this awareness of this being something prominent in our charts, our gene key profiles, then we're able to step out of the shadow, the confusion. We can step more into the actual gift, and which is the imagination. And so, you know, Richard really talks about how these states of confusion is just caused by all this mental chatter. And when we are able to step back and, you know, whether it's sitting in meditation and we find those states where we're not really thinking, we start to see what a sham the mind is, and that we actually don't need to solve anything, and that over time will bring us answers, and not just time, but like the awareness that like everything is happening for a divine purpose and reason. And when we look at that and we can see that, we can just rest and not try to figure things out. And Ra really talks about this as well, where, you know, people who have this gate, like, it's not for solving your personal problems. Like, this is a very shadow aspect of this gate, is like we're trying to constantly figure out things in our own personal lives. This gate is actually more in service to the collective, in the sense that, you know, we're here to see patterns in things and to imagine a new or different way of doing things based on that confusion and sorting through all of that. And so that's actually helpful for external things, whether it's your job and you're trying to find a solution at your work or with other people or whatever. But if you're in the moment constantly trying to figure something out, like, it's going to cause you a lot of anxiety and mental stress and pressure. And the head is a pressure center. And so, of course, there's going to be this mental pressure to try to solve things, especially with its programming partner, Gene Key 63, and the shadow of that gene key is doubt. And so that goes hand in hand with the confusion. The doubt makes the confusion that much more like uncomfortable and difficult to sit with. And the gift of Gene Key 63 is inquiry. And I really believe that goes so well, like, hand in hand with the gift of Gate 60 or Gene Key 64 of imagination, because there's just like this overall theme of like curiosity and just allowing the ideas and the unlimited like ways of shifting and changing and doing things, and allowing solutions to be solved in this completely different new way that we never thought before. And so when we move through the shadow aspect of Gate 64, Richard Rudd really talks about the way that we do that is by turning the mind off. And he says a lot of people really struggle with that, because when you turn the mind off, then you end up facing a lot of your own internal pain, and that can be very shocking to a lot of people. And not that it's like a bad thing, but it's very necessary most of the time, because we have these like pearls of wisdom and growth that are hidden in the deepest, scariest parts of us, and the mind is constantly turned on and creating these scenarios to distract us from going into that and discovering that and blowing through the sham of the mind. Because if the mind wasn't speaking or telling us like what to do all the time, like what would be its purpose? It's afraid of its own death. And so when we look at it from that perspective, we can say, okay, mind, like you're useful, but we don't necessarily have to try to solve things, and we don't have to run from things. We can go into the pain and we can process it in healthy ways. And that's part of moving from the shadow to the gift, is using, like mutating the pain through the creative expression of it. And so that can be done through art or singing or poetry. And I know personally for myself, over the past year, as I've gone through like my own spiritual awakening of going just basically head on into all of this pain and processing a lot, is like I wrote so much poetry, and I wrote songs on my guitar, and you know, even watching the evolution of, you know, how I was creating social posts and how I was creating YouTube videos, and the stories that I was telling people, they've just shifted and changed over time from less of a place of pain to more of like an acceptance and, you know, coming into more of a place of like joy. And so you can see how that pain is transformed in the way that we're able to express it. And so there's no right or wrong way to express. Like you can literally like, you know, go work out and like create a new workout for yourself and like punch pillows and punch bags and express your pain in that way. Or you could get a big canvas out and draw like the most outlandish, weird picture and have it make no sense to anyone else except for you, as just your only way to like, or as your way to process the pain or the emotions that are coming up inside of you. And it's just your judgment of it that really stops the flow of you stepping from that shadow into the gift, and being able to like really release that, to release yourself from the grips of the mind that is saying, this doesn't make sense, why am I doing this? Or the doubt, and saying like, this doesn't, like, how is this helping? Or like, this is ugly, or this is wrong. And you just turn all of that off, and you just allow the mystical process to mutate all of that, so you can really step into the gift, which is imagination. And so it seems like simple in some way. My mind was trying so hard to like understand what that really means, and it's not necessarily a mental process. It's really just, you're in the state of confusion. If you're trying to figure out your life, just accept that you're not going to figure out, and do your best to come to places of stillness where the mind isn't so active, and allow the pain and the emotions to come up, and then process it in a way that you can, or that makes the most sense to you. And then from there, like, solutions will present itself over time. And so with this specific gate, like, patience is like so key. Like, there's not necessarily going to be like you're going to have an answer right off the bat. And this is actually so incredibly beautiful. Like Richard Rudd talks a lot about how there are great leaps in consciousness for those who have this gate. And I know Richard Rudd has this gate in his incarnation cross and his in his profile. So it's pretty big in his profile. So I know that he embodies this and can really speak the frequency of that embodiment, because this lies so upfront in his profile. And it's the same for me as well. And so really like hearing him speak about it, and then me reflecting on my life and seeing where this has been such a huge way of like how I've lived my life without the awareness of it. It's like, it's really incredible. And so this gate of moving from the shadow to the gift, as I've reflected back, I've seen that like in those places of confusion, when I've just set them down, like years later, I've been able to look back and say like, oh, okay, this made sense why this happened. And especially after getting really, really quiet and turning the mind off in my Vipassana, it's like I had access to all these different ways and like of expressing my creativity, because my mind got so quiet that I was able to tap into this new channel where it was like this unlimited channel of creativity. And since then, it's like I have that direct access to that, to these downloads that are constantly coming to me. And it's literally like, I feel like after months and months and months of me being in just a pure state of confusion and like deep pain, I was able to like deeply sit with that pain in my own silence in the 3 days. And it was just like me against myself. Like, it was just, I was just observing my mind go in these like awful thought loops, and I had to face like really difficult truths. And at the end of the day, or at the end of my Vipassana, it was like I woke up and it was like, on the 4th day, I woke up and it was like this 5,000 pound weight had been lifted off of me, because, you know, I saw the sham of the mind. I saw that it wasn't necessarily true, but it wasn't necessarily bad. The mind was trying to show me where my blocks were, but I was afraid to go into the depths of it. And so when I got really silent and I didn't have any external chatter, I wasn't going to a podcast, I wasn't going to my therapist for advice, I wasn't going to like these different things. Like, I had to sit there in that pain and the confusion, and I had to sit there and be with it. And so coming out of that Vipassana, it was just like I met myself on a very deep level, and it created this like, I don't say like this pop of like enlightenment, but for me it was almost like this slow release of me having access to something that was always there all along, but there had been a block to it because I had been not allowing myself to release my need for control to figure out the confusion and make sense of it. And I had let that go, and I allowed myself to say, okay, I don't need to have the answer to this, and it's okay that I don't. And as soon as I did that, the confusion was still there in the background, but it wasn't gripping me and it didn't have control over me like before. It was just like, oh, it's there, and I have love for it, and I see it and I acknowledge it, but I don't need to know all of the answers right now. And it was just like incredibly liberating and freeing when I looked at it from that perspective, because this was something in my personal life that I've been trying to basically make sense of for the past year. And to really let that down, it was like so liberating. And so since I came out of that Vipassana, it's like I just want to sit and create all day. And when I really sit in that stillness and the mind isn't constantly going and like saying all these things, I have access to that infinite amount of imagination, of play, and just like purity from that sense, with no limitations and no judgments. And I'm sharing this because I want all of you to know that this isn't necessarily your path or how this unfolds for you, or you know how you may experience this exactly, but there is freedom from the chatter of the mind, from gate 64, because gate 64, when you are in the shadow aspect, like you are in your head. It is such a mental state, and there's so much liberation here that can affect you in like an infinite amount of ways, and there's so much freedom. And if we just really become the observer, and this is a tricky one too, because it's so mental and the mind is so sneaky, and I'm in constant contemplation and I'm constantly observing my mind, but I was still getting caught up in it. And it wasn't until I really put myself in basically like a solitary confinement position that I really got quiet, and then I got to see like the conflicting parts of my brain. It was like this part of my brain and this part of my brain, and I was just watching it go head to head, and I was watching it. And at one point during the weekend in the Vipassana, I was just like, you know what, Nina, it's just you against you. And if you can't find peace within yourself, like it doesn't matter to anyone else, but it matters to you. You're the one that has to live with yourself. And it was just like I watched my mind begin to shift and change and transform. And as I sat in meditation, I saw myself going from that crazy like lower vibrational thought loop to one of hope and excitement. And then I just kind of sat back and I was like, wait a second, my mind was just like in the state of depression and pulling me down, and I was feeling all these ways, and I was feeling tired, and now I'm in this like hopeful place like 10 minutes later. And it just, to have that experience, like I knew that in my mind, like, oh yeah, the mind, you know, can control you, whatever. I was just like, this is not cool. Like the mind can trick you, like it tricks you so deeply. And it's just having more and more of a deeper awareness of that, and being able to like really experience that firsthand in a very deep way. It was just like, whoa, like the mind controls so much. And so if anyone, like if you're watching this and you have this gate, like it's so profound to sit in meditation, to not necessarily try to get rid of the thoughts, but to watch and listen and acknowledge them and see where they're trying to take you, so that you can say, oh, okay, this is what's running the show. This is why I'm behaving this way, because I'm not finding closure with this, or I'm not able to find the solution. And then you can like set it down when you really have that awareness of it. And so this can really lead you to this place of transformation, of deep transformation. This Richard calls it like, you know, these pops of, you know, expanded consciousness, where you take these big leaps with this gate. And I've experienced this in the past, and I've experienced this recently, and it can feel overwhelming, but it's also just like, you're just in this state of just peace and like awe of like, oh my gosh, like there's so much to explore. And the mind is just there in the background because it's trying to help me in some way, but it doesn't mean that I have to listen to it or do anything with it. And it's really the beauty of this gate. And so when you go into the actual siddhi, the enlightenment aspect, or it's illumination. This gate is illumination, is a siddhi. You're moving to a place of just complete quiet, where the transmission of this siddhi is done without words. It's done in the space between the words, and it doesn't necessarily matter like what you are saying. It's how it's being said, and the way that you communicate and share things can be done from a complete state of confusion where nothing makes sense. But when people are around you and they're taking in what you're putting out, they're going to understand you on a cellular level, because that is the transmission of the siddhi of illumination. And so it's incredibly powerful when you look at it from that perspective. And we all have access to the shadow, the gift, and the siddhi at all states and like at all time. And so I get glimpses of when I'm really like experiencing the siddhi aspect, but then the mind jumps in, and then it completely like, you know, botches it. But it's not like an elusive thing. These are all states that we can experience at different times. And so I think that's it that I have to say. It's a 20 something minute video, and I really just wanted to come here on this video and share all of this, because I have been sitting with this gate for a very long time and what it really means to me. And actually the last bit of thing that I'm going to say is, since this is part of my Gene Keys profile, my purpose, I was like, how is this in relation to my purpose and my relationships in the Venus sequence? And I just realized like I was trying to seek of like something definite of like, this is my purpose in life, and this is why I need to have this relationship, and realizing like it's actually okay to be in this place of confusion and not try to analyze things and try to figure things out and be like, this is why this is happening, and this is why I'm in relation with this person and I've attracted this person. And it's like, I can actually just stop thinking, and I can just enjoy what is happening. And then after the fact, I can go back and I can reflect and say, oh, okay, that's what it meant. And it requires like this deep level of surrender, because you're never going to understand in the moment what necessarily the lesson is or the meaning of anything is. And that was something that was really difficult for me to let go of or to like grasp, because I've always needed to know. I've always needed to know everything. And it requires like such a big place of like letting go of control and like fully being present. Like this is such a big gene key or like gate for like just being okay with being in the present moment, and knowing that over time you will find the solution and you will understand why things happen the way they did. And for me personally, being the purpose in my Venus sequence, that's how it's reflected back in my relationships. There's going to be confusion, but then there's also like an unlimited like access to imagination and like creativity in the way that relationships can evolve for me. And that doesn't involve me figuring out why I'm in relation with somebody. I can just fully be present, enjoy how the relationship evolves over time, and then I can reflect back and I can choose to stay or evolve or walk away from that relationship and appreciate it for what it was or what it is, and go from there. And so that was like a really profound realization for me, is that just really surrendering and being in the present moment and not having to know all the answers. So it's a little bit of gate 64 summed up. So I'm curious to see how everyone else experiences this gate, especially if you don't have the connecting gate 47, because that can create a little bit more confusion without, finding that clarity with that full channel, which I feel like is a little bit more of a relief when you have that full channel. And I know for me personally, I don't have the connection from my head and ajna to my throat. So sharing all of these things with you, it's more difficult for me to fully express in words, like how I experience things, or how I like intellectualize things a little bit more easier when I'm around people who have gate 43, who bridges my split between those. But the way that I speak and share is more from my own experience of my 35-36 and my solar plexus to my throat center. And so I hope that, or I know that when I feel called and I have an urge to share these experiences, you are picking up on the frequency of my voice and what I'm sharing, and it's not necessarily like the words that I'm speaking. So if that makes sense to you at all. But that is how I communicate through the emotions and my experiences. So it's not necessarily a mental state, but me doing this video, sometimes like I am trying to make sense of the confusion, or how this is really integrated and how this really shows up in my life. So I'm hoping that you all enjoyed this video and you got something out of it. And if you have any other questions, or if you'd like to learn a little bit more about human design, I have a free human design PDF on my website that you can go to and you can download. I also have lots of free content on my social media, and I'll link all of that down in the description. And if you have any interest in working with me, working through any confusion you may have, or you want to dive deeper into your human design or your gene keys, or you just plainly need a little bit more support with where you're at in your life, head over to my website and you can work with me one-on-one, or purchase a blueprint where I go more in depth into your human design. So I hope to hear from all of you guys soon, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.